Medieval winters could kill in a single night, and survival meant relying on methods most people today have never heard of. These weren't cozy comforts, they were practical, often strange tricks that actually worked. So what were the 7 techniques that kept people alive when the cold was merciless? One of the most surprising ways they stayed warm was right under their very blankets. Heated stones and bricks tucked under medieval bedding turned freezing nights into bearable ones. This wasn't some desperate last resort either. It was a carefully planned heating system that worked better than most people realize. Medieval folks would heat smooth stones or bricks in their hearths until they were properly hot. The key word here is smooth. Rough or cracked stones could shatter when heated, sending hot fragments flying around the room. River rocks were perfect for this job. They had been tumbled smooth by water over years, making them safe to heat without cracking. Plus, they held heat for hours once they got properly warmed up. These rocks had better job security than most medieval workers. They literally couldn't be fired. The wrapping process was crucial. People used old cloth, worn-out clothing, or even thick layers of straw to cover their heated stones. This prevented burns and controlled how fast the heat escaped. Medieval beds weren't exactly comfortable to begin with. Most people slept on straw mattresses that were lumpy, scratchy, and about as supportive as a wet napkin. Sleeping on straw was like camping indoors, except you couldn't go home when it got uncomfortable. The timing had to be perfect. Heat the stones too early and they'd cool down before bedtime. Too late and you'd be handling dangerously hot rocks in the dark. Wealthy families had specially made wooden boxes for their heated stones. These containers were designed with air gaps and padding to release heat slowly and evenly. Poor families got creative with old grain sacks or worn-out blankets. Multiple stones could keep an entire family warm. Parents would heat several stones at once, distributing them among different beds or sharing them between family members. Children often got the first warm stones since they were more vulnerable to cold. The heat lasted surprisingly long. A properly heated stone wrapped in thick cloth could stay warm for 6 to 8 hours. Medieval rocks were basically the first rechargeable heating pads, minus the electricity bill. Different types of stone worked better than others. Dense stones like granite held heat longer than porous ones. Size mattered too. Stones that were too small cooled down quickly, while ones that were too large were difficult to handle safely. The technique spread across Europe because it worked everywhere. Whether you lived in an English cottage or a German farmhouse, heated stones provided reliable warmth using materials that everyone could find locally. Sometimes, though, the solution involves treating your clothes in ways that might surprise modern people. Coating wool and leather clothing with beeswax, tallow, or fish oil might sound disgusting, but this technique turned regular garments into effective wind barriers for indoor use. Medieval homes were so drafty that people needed protection from cold air even inside their houses. Most medieval houses were basically wooden puzzles with gaps between every piece. Windows were just holes covered with shutters that never fit quite right. These houses had more air leaks than a medieval gossip circle. The coating process worked by filling in the tiny spaces between fabric fibers. Wool naturally traps warm air in its structure, but it also lets cold air move through pretty easily. Add a layer of wax or grease, and suddenly you have a fabric that blocks wind. Beeswax was the premium choice for families who could afford it. It didn't smell terrible, stayed flexible even in cold weather, and lasted longer than other options. Beeswax was the luxury car wax of medieval clothing, expensive but worth every coin. Tallow came from rendered animal fat and was the middle option for most families. Cheaper than beeswax but more effective than fish oil, tallow provided excellent protection from drafts. Fish oil was the budget option, especially for families living near the coast. Applying the coating required patience and technique. You couldn't just slop grease on clothing and expect good results. The coating had to be worked into every fiber, paying special attention to seams and areas where cold air might sneak through. The treated clothing felt different, heavier and less flexible than normal fabric. People could sit near drafty windows or work by poorly sealed doors without feeling that cutting wind that made indoor temperatures unbearable. Women often treated their shawls and cloaks for indoor use during the coldest months. Men typically greased their work shirts or outer tunics since they often had to do indoor tasks. Children's clothing got the grease treatment too. Kids were more likely to get sick from cold exposure, so parents made sure their little ones had wind protection even indoors. The maintenance aspect was important. These coatings wore off with use and had to be reapplied regularly throughout the winter. Medieval laundry day was basically a seasonal waterproofing workshop with extra steps. Different regions developed their own coating recipes. Northern areas might add pine resin for extra protection. Coastal communities mixed in whale oil when they could get it. Of course, clothing only helped so much. Medieval folks also discovered that what they stuffed inside their bedding could make the difference between a good night's sleep and a miserable one. Stuffing mattresses and quilts with goose down was the ultimate luxury in medieval times, but most families couldn't afford such expensive bedding. They discovered that grain chaff, the leftover husks from harvesting wheat, oats, and barley, could provide nearly the same insulation for practically nothing. Goose down was definitely the gold standard for medieval bedding. Those tiny feathers create thousands of air pockets that trap warm air close to your body while keeping cold air out. Sleeping on goose down was like being hugged by a cloud that actually kept you warm. Chaff became the brilliant alternative that anyone could obtain. After harvesting grain, farmers were left with tons of empty husks that had no other use. These lightweight shells were perfect for stuffing bedding because they created air pockets similar to down feathers. The air trapping principle works the same whether you're using expensive goose feathers or free grain husks. Air is an excellent insulator, and both materials create lots of tiny spaces where warm air can be captured. Collecting and preparing chaff required timing and effort. Families had to gather the husks immediately after grain processing before they got wet or started to rot. Medieval people basically turned agricultural waste into luxury bedding. They were recycling before recycling was cool. Wheat chaff was considered the premium option among grain husks. It was relatively soft, held its shape well, and didn't break down as quickly as other types. Oat chaff was lighter, but tended to compact more over time. Cattail fluff provided another excellent alternative for families living near marshes or wetlands. The white, cotton-like material from cattail seed heads was incredibly light and fluffy, creating air pockets that rivaled goose down. Harvesting cattails required knowledge and timing. The seed heads had to be collected at just the right moment when they were full of fluff. It was like having a marsh full of natural pillows if you knew when to pick them. The annual bedding refresh was a major household event. After harvest season, families would empty their old mattress stuffing and replace it with fresh materials. Old chaff could be composted or fed to animals. Layering different materials created the most effective bedding systems. A base layer of heavier material like straw provided structure and support. Middle layers of chaff or cattail fluff added insulation. Even the poorest families could usually afford some kind of bedding improvement. Gathering cattail fluff or saving grain chaff required work, but no money. Sometimes even the best bedding couldn't make a house warm enough for comfortable sleeping. When that happened, medieval families looked underground for their solution. Moving down into storage cellars for sleeping might sound like giving up, but medieval families discovered that underground spaces stayed much warmer than surface rooms during brutal winter weather. The earth itself acted like a giant heat storage system. Underground areas maintain steady temperatures because the earth absorbs and releases heat very slowly. While surface temperatures might swing wildly from day to night or season to season, dig down just a few feet and you find temperatures that barely change. Medieval cellars typically held steady around 40 to 50 degrees, even when outside temperatures dropped well below freezing. The Earth basically has its own heating system that never needs fuel. It just runs on physics. Families didn't just throw blankets on the dirt floor and hope for the best. Proper cellar sleeping required preparation and planning. The first step was always creating a barrier between human bodies and the cold, damp earth below. Straw made the perfect foundation layer. Thick piles of straw provided insulation from ground cold and absorbed moisture that might otherwise make sleeping uncomfortable. Medieval floor plans were pretty simple. Straw goes on bottom, people go on top. Animal hides worked excellently as ground covers over the straw. A well-prepared hide could block moisture while adding another layer of insulation. Some families went further and laid wooden planks over their straw and hide foundation. Ventilation required careful attention in underground sleeping spaces. Cellars could trap stale air and moisture from breathing, making the air quality poor for sleeping. Smart families left small openings at ground level. The timing of moving underground required good judgment. Move too early and families endured unnecessary discomfort in cramped spaces. Wait too long and they suffered through dangerously cold nights above ground. Children often found cellar sleeping to be an adventure rather than a hardship. The underground space felt cozy and cave-like, different from normal sleeping arrangements. Some families made permanent improvements to their cellars for winter sleeping, like adding drainage systems. Medieval families basically invented finished basements, except theirs were designed for survival instead of entertainment. The psychological benefits were significant. Knowing you had a reliable, warm sleeping space made harsh winters more bearable. Families could endure colder daytime temperatures knowing that bedtime would bring warmth. People still needed ways to make their above-ground homes more comfortable during winter days and evenings, though. Piling snow against the outside walls of houses sounds backwards until you understand that snow is actually an excellent insulator when used correctly. Medieval families discovered that strategic snow placement could dramatically reduce heat loss and make their drafty homes much more comfortable. Snow contains up to 90% trapped air, and air happens to be one of nature's best insulators. When snow gets packed against a building, it creates an insulating barrier that prevents warm air from escaping through gaps in walls. Medieval houses were notorious for having gaps everywhere. These houses had more holes than a medieval cheese wheel. Wooden boards rarely fit together perfectly, leaving cracks where cold air could blow right through. The snowbanking technique worked by blocking those gaps before cold air could get inside. Instead of trying to seal every crack individually, families could create one continuous barrier that covered all the problem areas at once. Fresh snow worked best because it contained the most trapped air. As snow aged and got compressed by wind or weight, it became denser and less effective as insulation. Fresh snow was like nature's insulation delivery service. It showed up free and ready to use. The banking process started as soon as the first major snowfall arrived. Families would shovel snow from walkways, roofs, and open areas, piling it against their exterior walls. The goal was creating a thick, continuous barrier without any gaps. Children often helped with snowbanking since they were closer to ground level and could pack snow into lower areas that adults might miss. Different snow conditions required different approaches. Some families developed sophisticated snowbanking techniques. They'd build the snow up in layers, packing each layer firmly before adding the next. Others created sloped tops that would shed rain or melting snow away from the foundation. The insulating effect was immediate and noticeable. Indoor temperatures could rise by several degrees once effective snowbanking was in place. More importantly, those constant cold drafts disappeared. Regional variations developed based on local snowfall patterns and building styles. Northern communities with heavy snowfall could create massive barriers. Medieval people invented natural weather stripping that rebuilt itself every time it snowed. Some families coordinated their snowbanking efforts with neighbors. They'd help each other move large amounts of snow, especially after major storms that dumped more than individual families could handle alone. Snowbanking helped keep homes warmer from the outside, but medieval people also needed internal strategies to maintain body heat throughout those long, cold nights. Consuming carefully prepared hot drinks before bedtime was one of the most effective ways medieval people maintained body warmth throughout cold nights. These weren't just comfort beverages, they were specifically crafted brews designed to boost circulation and help people sleep warm. Spiced ale topped the list of warming drinks for families who could afford it. The alcohol provided immediate warming sensations throughout the body, while spices like ginger, cinnamon, and pepper actually improved blood circulation. The spice selection wasn't random. Ginger contains compounds that naturally dilate blood vessels, improving circulation throughout the body. Medieval people basically invented the world's first energy drinks, except theirs were designed for warmth instead of staying awake. Wine-based warming drinks were popular in grape-growing regions. Mulled wine with honey and spices provided alcohol for warming, plus natural sugars that the body could convert to energy for heat production. Poor families who couldn't afford ale or wine created warming drinks from grain-based ingredients. Hot grain gruel made from oats, barley, or wheat provided calories and warmth while costing almost nothing to prepare. The preparation process was almost ceremonial, with families gathering around the fire to heat their beverages. Medieval happy hour was less about socializing and more about not freezing to death. Herbal teas offered alcohol-free alternatives that still provided warming benefits. Ginger tea was particularly effective because ginger naturally raises body temperature and improves circulation. Other warming herbs included mint and sage. The timing of consuming warming brews required careful planning. Drink them too early, and the warming effects wore off before bedtime. Too late, and people might need to leave their warm beds for bathroom trips. Different spice combinations provided different benefits. Cinnamon was thought to warm the stomach and aid digestion. Cloves were believed to prevent illness while providing warming sensations. Regional variations developed based on available ingredients and local preferences. Northern communities might include pine needle extracts for additional vitamins. Medieval bartending was basically medieval pharmacy with better taste. Children received modified versions of adult warming drinks. Their beverages contained less alcohol or different spice combinations considered safer for younger people. Hot milk with honey and mild spices was common. The social aspect of warming brews brought families together during harsh weather. Parents, children, and extended family members would gather around the fire to prepare and share their evening drinks together. When individual warming techniques weren't enough, though, families had one final strategy that involved everyone working together. The most organized approach to surviving brutal winter nights involved rotating heat watches, where family members took turns staying awake to tend fires and manage warming devices throughout the night. This wasn't just about keeping fires, it was a systematic approach to sharing warmth. In large medieval households where multiple families or extended family members lived together, heat management became a community effort. One or two people would stay awake during designated periods, maintaining fires and moving heated stones between different sleeping areas. The rotation system typically involved 2 to 3 hour shifts that provided enough coverage for entire nights while allowing each person adequate rest between duties. Medieval families invented the graveyard shift, except theirs was literally about preventing graves from being filled. Heat watch duties included moving heated stones between sleeping areas as they cooled down, ensuring everyone got their fair share of artificial warmth. Bed warmers made from metal containers filled with hot coals were rotated systematically. Preparation for heat watches began before bedtime. Extra firewood was stacked within easy reach of whoever would be tending the fire. Medieval night shift workers had the worst commute, from bed to fireplace and back again. The watchkeepers also served as guards against emergencies beyond just cold weather. Having someone awake and alert meant the family could respond quickly to house fires, break-ins, or medical problems. Different family members brought different strengths to heat watch responsibilities. Young adults were often better at staying awake and moving heavy heated stones around. Older family members typically excelled at fire management. The heat sharing system was designed to be fair and systematic. Heated stones and bed warmers moved in predetermined patterns, so everyone received equal warming time. Children and elderly family members often received priority treatment. Fuel management during heat watches required considerable skill and experience. Watchkeepers learned to recognize different types of wood and how they burned, when to add small amounts versus larger logs. The social aspects of heat watches strengthened family relationships. Taking a difficult night shift to keep others warm was considered an act of love and responsibility. Medieval climate control was definitely more hands-on than adjusting a thermostat. Everyone understood that survival depended on group effort. Some communities extended heat watch systems beyond individual families, allowing neighbors to coordinate their schedules for maximum efficiency. These 7 survival techniques demonstrate the incredible ingenuity medieval people developed for dealing with harsh winter conditions, proving that human adaptability and resourcefulness could overcome challenging environmental obstacles. But winter survival required more than just staying warm. Medieval people developed countless other clever strategies for thriving through the harshest months.